Right. Oh, that happened quick. I'll
Yeah,
just I'll do some editing as well if it's a bit.
yeah, yeah. Actually, one of the reasons why I reached out to you was it was one of your. I'm looking at your channel here. I think it was your interview with. Bear with me one second here. Dr. Helen Bond, I think it was, and
Yes.
you had asked a question that made me, and I don't know what the question was. I just don't remember that, but had made me think, oh, I need to tell you something. I need to just drop this and put it in your wheelhouse so you can think about it. And that is, as we take a look at the Olivet Discourse, in my opinion, and that's all you're getting, Dale, and that's not worth that much. It's just my opinion, all right? I think, because I've fallen into this trap in the past, I think we have to be careful not to commit ourselves to one way of thinking, and there could be a danger in doing that. In other words, one might say, well, I'm a preterist, so I'm going to look at this from a preterist point of view, or I'm a futurist, and I'm going to look at this from a futurist point of view. I think, and particularly with the Olivet Discourse, I think it's very possible that we have to take it verse by verse, line by line, and decide, is this a preterist type of, do we take a preterist view of this, or perhaps it leans towards a futuristic fulfillment, those kinds of things. Futuristic for us, yeah. Of course, I believe the Olivet Discourse was spoken futuristic for, at the time, there was the events but now we look back at many of the events as being in the past. But I think one of the dangers is committing ourselves to a label, where we say, I'm a preterist, then I'm going to take a preterist view, and then, or I lean towards preterism, or I lean towards futurism, and therefore I'm going to read that back into the passage. Because I think in the Olivet Discourse, especially in Matthew's version, I think there could be a point in which, and this is tough to discern, where Matthew might slip from one to the other. It's very possible that he's talking in what we would call a preterist view, and then suddenly he talks to what we would call now a futurist view, or we might see something that's still future. So again, it was something you said in that interview that made me think, oh, wait a second, it may not be all or nothing of one thing, but perhaps why not a combination? Why not? I think if we keep an open mind, which as an investigator, I know you're doing that, you're very open-minded to all these possibilities, and I appreciate that. So one possibility is maybe it flips back and forth. Isn't that a possibility, where we might see a change from one to the other,
Yes, and another one I've investigated in the film was the double fulfillment as well. That I suppose this is the same thing. It was fulfilled then, but it has a future perspective as well.
Right.
Yeah, so I suppose you could see it as maybe a half and half, or a quarter, three quarters, or maybe the two of them running simultaneously as well.
Yeah, and as far as the double fulfillment goes, I mean, I'll just give you my thoughts again. Just my thoughts, okay? That's all and a half. I'll get you a cup of coffee, and maybe in Wales, I don't know how much coffee is there, but in any event, I think there are, in some cases, there are some double fulfillments of prophecy, but in those cases, we have an indicator that there's been double fulfillment. For example, Isaiah talks about being born of a virgin, which we suspect might have been fulfilled in his own lifetime, but Matthew tells us this is a fulfillment of that again. So we have a secondary fulfillment of that. And I know a lot of times I've heard Christians talk about, for example, the Olivet Discourse. Well, yes, it has a past fulfillment, but isn't it double? Maybe there's a double fulfillment. Well, I'm quite open to a double fulfillment, but who's going to tell me that it is? If we have an apostle who tells us, or we have an established prophet who says, yes, this is going to be fulfilled again, why would we automatically assume that there's two fulfillments? I'll just throw out this as an example. Of course, Jesus told Peter that before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Now, that was fulfilled before the rooster crowed. Are we looking for that to happen again? Well, not really. I mean, I don't know of anybody. I mean, perhaps there's somebody out there who's looking for, a prophecy was given. We have a fulfillment. Why aren't we looking for a double fulfillment of that? And so, I think the same question would have to be asked for any other passage. Maybe there is a double fulfillment. open to it. But the problem that I would have is, who's to say? Who's the authority that's going to say? Like Matthew is the authority. Matthew gave us indicator that there was a virgin conceived in Isaiah's day and brought forth a son, and that this was fulfilled now in the birth of Christ. So Matthew, an inspired teacher, we believe, an apostle of Jesus Christ, has the authority, I believe, to tell us that this was doubly fulfilled. I'm fine with that. I can roll with that. I have no problem with that. So that's my only concern regarding double fulfillment is, who is to say? If an apostle tells me that this is fulfilled once and will be fulfilled again, then I'm cool with that. But and I'm also cool with it. Maybe there will be, but who's to say? Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, and the one that I found difficult in the film is the of that day and hour knows no man, and I think it was Bruce Gore who saw most of the fulfillment in 70 AD, but yet he sort of took the double fulfillment on that verse. That did Jesus not know the day concerning 70 AD when the Romans came, or is he talking about the second coming? So yeah, that verse in particular, and I suppose you have to admire maybe preterists or futurists in that regard, because they will sort of go one way or the other, won't they? He arrived in 70 AD. No, this is the second coming, and sometimes not much in between.
Right. And I mean, I was sort of on a journey like yourself. It sort of began in 2005 for me. I was pastor at the time, and I thought, I really need to kind of get my head wrapped around eschatology. And I didn't really know much. And I was raised in dispensationalism. That's what I was taught all my life, and that's what I thought was true. I mean, but I didn't really investigate it. So I started reading, and I started looking, sort of what you're doing yourself, Dale. Just kind of trying to find out where this is taking us. And that's one of the things I realize is, well, maybe it's not necessarily all this or all that, but maybe we have, some preterist view here and some futurist view here. Maybe there's some points where there's a shift in the language, for example, that would lead us one way or the other.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Like, where do you see yourself right now in terms of the Olivet Discourse? How are you understanding it?
Well, I found it incredible that there seems to be a 70 AD explanation for nearly every verse I discovered, including the day and hour knows no man. Now, I didn't cover the three parables in Matthew 25, but I understand there's some 70 AD there. So I sort of, I can explain it really. I suppose on paper, I would say, yes, I'm a partial preterist, but I think a little bit like you, Dane, I don't want to close myself off with what God might have to say to this world right now. And so I think it was my wife gave me an example of Shakespeare. If you read Shakespeare, you read his books at face value, you have the story, the history. But from what I understand, he would often put little comments about the society hidden in there. So it's almost like you have the text, but then underneath, maybe is there a subtext that can lead to this wider, bigger stuff?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think for me, that would be the way I would see it, really, would be to be comfortable to go to both sides, really. So yeah, I think that's where I've ended up on it, and obviously I'll keep searching. Like you shared in your videos, all those things Jesus said: you will be persecuted, you will be handed over. We know that it happened to them, the apostles. I know the Abomination of Desolation is an interesting one. Does it refer to Jerusalem surrounded by armies? Was it, in the case of Daniel, was it talking about Antiochus Epiphanes? Like I don't know if you know much about historicism, Eva, Steve Waldman.
A little bit. You don't run into many historists these days, but yes.
Yes, like I haven't quite seen the logic in that one, which is the idea of the papal power being the Antichrist and the little horn, etc.
Right.
So yes, that would. Sorry, that was quite a long answer, but I think that would be
No,
my
no.
position.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's. I mean, that's that makes sense. It makes sense to me. And like I said, I'm not claiming that I have a handle on this. I think that Mark and Luke, in terms of the Olivet Discourse, are a little bit easier to kind of put in one little capsule and make it more neat and clean. It's Matthew that kind of throws me around a little bit. And even in Matthew's intro questions, he has 3 questions at the beginning of chapter 24, where the other ones kind of, they don't really work with that 3rd question. The end of the age, and so that's a little not difficult. I mean, not impossible, but a little difficult to work around, but it also opens the possibility that maybe Matthew is bringing some material from elsewhere, because it seems like he has a tendency to do that, to work some of the material in. For example, like in Matthew chapter 10, when Matthew sends out, or excuse me, when Jesus sends out his apostles on a short-term mission trip, he tells them just to stay in Israel, don't go beyond. And then if you read later in the text, he says, you'll be dragged before governors and kings for my name's sake. Well, wait a second. Why would they be before governors and kings if they're just in Israel? And so it appeared that maybe Matthew is taking material that Jesus gave on a later date and just kind of categorizing it, all in this one section. So it's possible then that Matthew is doing that in the Olivet Discourse. It's possible anyhow. Maybe there is some teaching that Jesus gave on another occasion that Matthew sees as similar to what we have in the Olivet Discourse, and he just kind of brings it in. That's in my opinion, that's very consistent with Matthew,
Yes, and that you mentioned in the film about his Jewish audience being familiar with that terminology, perhaps as well, the end of the age, or perhaps the Jewish age, like you
Sure.
mentioned. Yeah.
And possible. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like you, I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. I just simply won't be dogmatic about all of these things, because I just don't want to be.
Yeah.
I have a sense about them, and I kind of go that way. But even as I teach any of these passages, and I haven't taught them in some time, but when I teach them, I'm careful not to be, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Is this way or the highway type thing. I don't agree with that approach very well. I think we just have to be more sensitive to the possibilities, that there are other possibilities.
Yes, and I often wonder, with texts like this and maybe the book of Revelation, were they perhaps given to us for that very reason, not to be uh, dogmatic on one, but they have, the Spirit sort of has the ability to make it speak in multiple directions, I wonder.
Oh, yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. What those directions are, it's kind of hard for us to say, but I think that's what makes the scripture so dynamic, is its ability to speak to many generations over and again in many different ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because did it sort of, one thing I struggled with for a while was the connection between the destruction of the temple and then immediately into sort of the end of the world, the end of the age. And I think Steve Wahlberg in the film suggested that Jesus is perhaps trying to combine both important events for the disciples. Maybe the destruction of the temple was the end of the world to them, perhaps
Sure.
was one way of thinking of it. And I suppose as I was digging deeper, I think maybe the end of an age or an era perhaps would connect it a little bit more to the temple. But that's not to say on the subtext, perhaps it is talking about a wider um, end of world kind of context. Did you have any struggles with that when you first engaged with this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that the end of the age was a big struggle, because that's what it sounds like to us. Reading it, it sounds like the age. But in comparing that to, or just understanding the Jewish context as well as I can, I'm not a scholar. I'm not highly trained in those things, but just from what I can read and determine, it's kind of, in a sense, just as you described, it could be just as they're seen as the end of an era for them, an end of, and that made sense. But yes, there's a lot of difficulties with that question. I mean, it really is. And why does Matthew contain it and the others don't? That's another problem. Why, I mean, I have my thoughts on that, but I don't know if my thoughts are true. They're accurate. I just don't know.
Yeah. And then another bit I found really interesting in one of your vlog videos, which, yes, it is in the film. I liked how you distinguished that day from those days. That Jesus seems to be talking about, okay, a certain specific day rather than this sort of categorizing it in the plural. I found that very interesting, actually. That's a very convincing way to look at it, I think, that Jesus, he's now talking about something different, not 70, 80.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I see the possible shift in Matthew's gospel, the possible shift in verses, and I'm looking at my screen here, between verses 35 and 36, right around in there, where he says, but about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven or the Son. And then, well, right before that, he said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. We hadn't talked about heaven and earth passing away. So that could be the shift that Matthew, a segue that Matthew's using possibly to interject additional material that he could be pulling from somewhere else. Matter of fact, also the parallel in verses 37, 38 about the days of Noah, and I think that parallels with Luke 17, if I'm not mistaken, Luke 17 or 19. I have to look it up to be sure here. That almost sounds like Jesus might be talking about, well, you and I would call it second coming. Now, if that's the case, then that section seems to parallel that discourse better than maybe just the 70 AD discourse, possibly.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Because the Luke 17, like you said, it's outside of his Olivet Discourse, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And since that seems to parallel it, could that be an indicator then that we have a change now and that we're talking about something else that Matthew just throws in there in this chapter? Don't know,
Yeah. So I would love, I don't know if you remember in the film, one of the vloggers mentioned the verses might not necessarily be in chronological order. And when Jesus says, this generation will not pass away until all these things, we tend to maybe read that and see the whole Olivet Discourse. But the one vlogger suggested perhaps reading the Olivet Discourse as the gospel writers combinated these verses together. Basically, that verse doesn't mean you have to go to a full preteristic approach immediately. I don't know if you remember that section in the film.
I don't. I'm afraid I don't. Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, if you had any thoughts on that verse in particular, I know that's the key, the key crunch verse sometimes.
The verse being which one?
This generation will not.
This generation. Well, I mean, my thoughts on that is not so much the phrase "this generation," but what takes place in that same sentence. Let me see here. This generation will not pass until all these things take place. I can't find it, but that's what the verse says, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So not so much this generation as much as these things. That's the part that I seize upon, because at the beginning of it, of the Olivet Discourse, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, tell us, when will these things occur? They use that phrase, these things. And then Jesus uses that at least twice in his discourse. He talks about these things. And I wonder if these are like bookends, as I describe them, like one at the beginning, when will these things happen? And then Jesus sort of suggests that, I can't find that verse you were just talking about. I'm skimming here. excuse me, let me just find it here. Yeah, verse 34. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things. What these things? Well, I think it's what the disciples had asked him. When would these things happen? And that's the phrase that Jesus seems to seize upon, the phrase "these things." So you asked me about this generation. I mean, I have some thoughts about that phrase, but these things in that sentence to me jumps out even more than that phrase does, because he's talking about what things? Well, these things that they were talking about. That's how I see it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I've noticed there seems to be some parallels with other scriptural verses that talk about the day of the Lord is sooner than we thought, in Romans 11, I think it is, and I think it's Hebrews 1. We are in the last days. I don't know if you've come across this whole idea that some scholars seem to think that the apostles thought that the second coming was going to happen in their lifetime. There was a section where Bertrand Russell was quoted in the film, and I mean, he essentially said that Jesus got it wrong, that the apostles got it wrong because he didn't come back. But I know from a preterist perspective, they seem to see Jesus did come back in some shape or form in judgment. I don't know if you've had much experience with that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, in some sense, I do agree that his coming to them would be seen as judgment. I mean, one of the challenges is Matthew chapter 16. It's like verse 30, 31. I can't remember 32, right at the end of the chapter, where Jesus said, "Surely I tell you, this generation will not pass." No, I'm sorry. Let me get it up here once. It's the final verse, I think it is. Truly, I tell you, some are standing here today who will not see death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay. So the coming of the Son of Man, what is that? That almost sounds like he did get it wrong. If he's referring to a second coming, he certainly missed it by a couple thousands of years. But I mean, I tend to agree with the preterist, understanding that, or at least as far as saying that his coming in judgment in 70 AD could be seen as coming. That, or at least the judgment that happened in 70 AD could be seen as his coming. Maybe but I don't take a full preterist view. I still believe that there is a future coming of our Lord, and so I differ in that. But I do agree, to some degree, with the preterist understanding. Yeah, he came in 70 AD in a sense. There was a sense of his coming there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense anyhow. I mean, he used the words like that in Revelation chapters 1 through 3, when in the letters to the churches. John is writing a letter from Christ to these churches, and to several of the churches he said, do this or I'm coming. Almost like a mother shouting down to her son, "Hey, don't make me come up there. I'm coming in judgment if I do." And so his coming there in Revelation was not his second coming. It's not like, if you don't get straight, I'll do my second coming, but I'm coming in judgment, and I'll take your candlestick away, or whatever. I'll bring some sort of judgment to it. So I do see that his coming can be seen easily as judgment. I just don't agree with the full preterist. I do believe there's still a future coming of our Lord.
Yeah. Yes, I think that would be the position I've ended up on. I mean, I've done some follow-up videos on the second coming, because another section in the film that was really hard to sort of think about on maybe a spiritual level is when some of them suggested that God is not here to rescue us. Basically, it's up to us to clean up our own mess in the world. The second coming seen as this rescue, whereas Jesus sort of talks about watch and wait, and wait till the end, endurance, even though you're going to go through some terrible things. I just find it interesting how people have sort of, in what way have they formulated the second coming then, I suppose, would be my point.
Yeah, I have the same question. From a full preterist view, I'm not sure how that can be understood. I mean, some of the Paul's words, in that moment, twinkling of an eye, we will be changed. Those of us alive. So there's, I think there's pretty strong language about a change coming. Something, an event that's going to, because he even said, and then will it be fulfilled, or and then will the scriptures be fulfilled? So there's still an event Paul's looking forward to, I believe. Incidentally, I want to suggest or say something too. I mean, it is when the writers in the apostles like Hebrews and the other writers talk about last days, the dating of the New Testament is kind of important too, and I know you explored that with one of your guests, or at least one. They may have been more than one, but I know the one you talked about that, because if the New Testament was penned after 70 A.D., then what do those phrases mean? If it's penned prior to, it could be easily seen as this coming judgment, the last days of the first covenant, or this earlier covenant, So that's kind of an important question too.
Yes. Like I know with Revelation, for example, there's a big debate on, was it in the 60s before the temple was destroyed, or was it in the 90s? And I know that those who hold to the 90s view, I think that's one way to get out of the preterist argument, because, well, that was years after the destruction of the temple, and John still saw the second coming as future. But yes, I suppose if it was in the 60s, like you said, we could fit it into an end of an old covenant, last day kind of understanding.
Right. I think the general thought is that John wrote Revelation prior to his gospel. I think that's the general consensus. And I'm not going to, what I'm going to share with you here, I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, but I just shared you with an email that I've worked professionally as an investigator for 35 years or so, and I've done some language studies. I had some schooling on languages and its use in investigations. I've kind of brought that sometimes to my study of the scripture, because that's just who I am, And there is interesting in I think it's in John chapter. Is it 6? No. John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, and this is a lot to pin on one word, but as an investigator, it really jumps out to me. John says that in verse 2, this is John chapter 5, verse 2. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered porches. Okay. He uses the present tense. He says, there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool. Now, the word is I mean, it's from the Greek. It would imply whatever the word is. I've looked it up. I'm not a Greek scholar, okay, but it does imply present tense. John knows how to use the past tense. He uses it all throughout his gospel. He's quite adept at doing that. And when someone shifts, and I'll tell you this, Dale, from an investigative standpoint, when there's a shift in language from present tense to past tense, or one way or the other, from past to present, when you have a shift in language, you have a marker. I mean, you should be putting a marker there. There's something going on here. Why is there a shift in language? And John shifts there. He suddenly moves into the present tense, and yet in the very next, 2 verses later, one was there who had been an invalid for 38 years, was there. He goes back to the past tense. Now, the question that I have here, anybody should have, is why did he shift to the present tense in verse 2? Why did he say there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool? If this had been written in, let's say, 90 AD or whatever, or much later then, he would have known that there is no sheep, there is no pool, there is no sheep gate, there is no Jerusalem practically. The city would have been destroyed, the temple as well. And more natural use of language would have said there was in Jerusalem a sheep gate. But he didn't. He used present tense. Now, I am not going to make a case based on one word found in the Gospel of John, but I'm going to tell you as an investigator, it jumps off the page at you. He shifts the language there. Now, I can't help but think, did he write that because he believed that in Jerusalem there is a sheep gate, there's a pool there, present tense? If that's the case, then this letter, his gospel, could have been written before 70 AD. Now that goes against all, I understand, it goes against all modern scholarship. I understand, everybody places it much later. And maybe there is later, maybe it is. But if it is, why did he use the present tense?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is incredible. I will definitely be highlighting that a little bit later.
Highlight it, answer the question, and tell me what the answer is, Dale. Why did he use the present tense? Why? And he doesn't use it. He doesn't use it like that in anywhere else. He's constantly in the past tense. I mean, I think on one of your videos, you said you have a child. I can't remember how old your child is, a young daughter or something like that.
Yeah, but 3.5.
Children, 3.5. Okay. I can guarantee you she knows the difference between past and present tense. And even at 3 years old, she will use past and present tense. Children at a very early age can have a concept of time well enough to describe past and present tense. And so therefore, that just makes this even bigger. Why would he do this? He knows how to use the past tense. John should be aware that the temple was destroyed if it's 90 AD. He knows what's happened. He would know that. He would have said there was. But he goes from past to present, back to past.
Wow.
I just find that extremely interesting, Dale.
Yes. It's very similar. I know this is a completely different topic, but in Genesis, I can't think of which verse. There's a couple actually. It sort of says, this thing is still here to this day, or this
right.
place.
Yes, in Joshua, I believe. Yes.
Yes, and because I don't believe necessarily in the documentary hypothesis argument, which I don't know if you know much about that. It's basically the idea the Israelites wrote it much later in Babylon and it wasn't written by Moses. But I think, how would they know those objects were there if they were in Babylon? It's way too late in time.
Right. Good point. But that creates a marker, in the text. Wait a second. Someone is saying this is present. That's a marker that tells you a little bit about the date of the writing, or at least a thought at the date of the writing. You're very correct. Yeah. That's a good point to bring up. You're right. In the case of John, most scholarship puts John last, as you probably know. Mark is usually seen as the earliest gospel. Mark, then maybe Matthew and Luke or something like that, and then John is late. Again, I'm not placing all my money on the two-letter English word is, but if it's as powerful as I take it to be, that puts John before 70 AD. If scholarship is correct in the order, how early could Mark have been written?
Yeah. Wow. And then, did you say the common belief would be Revelation is before John's Gospel?
I think so. Yeah.
Wow.
I think that's the common belief. Yeah. And the reason why I think is because Revelation seems to inform John. For example, and this is very subjective, but John in the book of Revelation sees Jesus as the Lamb. John's the only gospel in which John the Baptist says, "Behold, the Lamb of God." So some scholars believe that John had his vision and then later kind of brought that back into his gospel reading. I mean, that's just a example of why it's thought that way. I have no clue. I really don't know. But yeah, I think that's the general scholarship of it.
Wow. Because yes, I don't agree anymore with the arguments that it's two different Johns, because from my investigation of the Olivet Discourse, actually, there are strong parallels in Revelation, and you consider that Jesus only took 4 of them up on the mountain to tell them the discourse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, chapters 4 through 19 in the book of Revelation. I mean, I personally see a lot of parallels to the Olivet Discourse. Yeah, I mean, as far as the different Johns, I mean, I'm familiar with the theory. I don't know it well enough to argue for or against it, but I'm familiar with somewhat with it.
Yeah. Wow. No, it's amazing those little sections in the scripture that we can just glance by and not see it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you've ever watched like interviews sometimes with people who have committed crimes, oftentimes like the news media will stick a microphone in their face and they'll talk to somebody maybe prior to their arrest and things like that. I guarantee you law enforcement is watching those videos because oftentimes they make slip ups, they say things, they change tenses. For example, a person might be talking about his spouse who's missing, and he'll say something like, "Yeah, she was a beautiful woman," and law enforcement, wait, what do you mean was? Why are you using the word was? Because she's, as far as you know, she should still be alive out there. And so I'm just telling you, this is a really important point, and I see it as really critical. I really do.
Yeah, because I know there's also sort of a big emphasis on like why isn't the temple mentioned sometimes in some of the texts? I mean, it seems to me that the Christians felt no need to mention it because they were sort of the new living temple, as Paul said.
Absolutely, yeah. Why mention it? Why?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. I agree. I mean, Paul, I think 3 times uses the word temple, 2 in the book of Corinthians, and both times he refers to the church clearly. Yeah. The third occasion is the one that's sort of in dispute. I think it's in Thessalonians where he'll set himself up in the temple or put an image in the temple. And that's the one that is being used as a rebuilt temple. But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Why use the word temple?
Yes. Yeah. I know that sometimes plays a little bit of role in dating Revelation, I think. But yeah.
I think even the 4 Gospels are hard to date. They're really, there's not a lot of internal data, in my opinion, in them to really give us. However, John 5 verse 2 is something to consider.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. There's another sort of another separate topic. Have you come across also in John 21? Because a lot of people sort of say, well, why didn't John write in first person narrative if he was the apostle? But there's an interesting verse. Oh, it's either in 21. See if I can find it.
Yeah. Verse 21 and 22, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, verse 24. This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. And then we know his testimony is true. This is the first person. So it seems like John wrote them down to his community and then someone collected them, it seems, I think.
Yeah. You're right. And I think I think is generally thought that John wrote this in Ephesus, if I'm not mistaken, that perhaps the church, encouraged to do this, and the we could be referred to the elders in Ephesus. I don't know that.
Yeah, just surprised I didn't highlight that one. I just highlighted it.
Yeah, and good catch. I mean, there's a shift in language. That's another when you see shifts in language like this from an investigator standpoint. Those are huge. Those are something you really seize on, you really look at, and you have to answer why. Why was there a shift in language?
Yeah. So what's your I know we're sort of going to different topics, Dane, if that's okay. Another one of my great hobbies and passions is sort of looking at historical archaeological evidence for a lot of Old Testament events. Are you aware of the Patterns of Evidence series?
I'm not.
Wonderful series. There's 4 DVDs by a guy called Tim Mahoney, who lives in where in America is it? My geography of America is not the best.
That's okay.
I've only been to like California a couple of times.
Yeah.
I forget where he is. But anyway, he sort of grew up a Christian, believed the Exodus, and then as he got older, all these scholars were telling him this event never really happened. And then he went to Egypt and said, "Oh, okay, let me find out for myself." And basically, what had happened, a lot of the early Egyptologists, he believes, had miscalculated the dating of the Exodus. They put it much later in history, but the evidence shows it should be much earlier.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, when you put the dates in line, there was this overwhelming evidence of a mass migration of people coming out of Egypt.
Wow. Wow.
And it basically, I don't know if you know much about it, but the verse really quickly did what happened was is in Exodus chapter 1, verse 11, I think it is, where it says, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses.
Mm.
And
Mm.
Ramesses the second, they believe, is the pharaoh around 1250 BC. And that's the date for the Exodus. But the book of First Kings says it was 400 years before Solomon's temple was built that they came out of Egypt, which puts it at 1450. So once you put the dating correct, all this evidence comes together, and it's really
Wow. Wow. No, I'm interested in you send me a link to that if you can
yeah.
find it or something.
I think I have the first DVD somewhere. I've tried to get in touch with Tim, but I think he's a really busy man. He probably he probably has so many interviews. But here's the first one: just patterns of evidence, Exodus.
Okay. Hang on. I'll take a screenshot of that with my phone. Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and then the second one was about did Moses write the Torah? Bit like what we were talking about earlier. And then the next DVDs, he's looking at the actual locations, like where was the sea parted, where is Mount Sinai? Yeah, so I don't know. I'm really fascinated, and I love the history because I don't know what your opinion is. Some people say it's important to stress that these events were real. Other Christians say, well, it's the morality that's important, not what really happened. Just wondering if you had an opinion on that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose I have an opinion on it. I suppose a person could become a follower of Jesus, love him and serve him, and not believe that the Exodus was real. In other words, it's not a requirement to love Jesus, is to believe that the Exodus was real. So in one sense, I suppose I don't care if you're going to love Jesus, forgive your enemies, live by the Sermon on the Mount, and just look to Jesus. But you say, hey, I don't believe that this really happened. Okay, I mean, it's not gonna change your life for me. My personal persuasion is I lean towards those as being literal events because they were written by evidently eyewitnesses. It sounds like. I mean, so I have no reason not to doubt them. But I mean, I actually kind of get asked this frequently in a different way. I mentioned to you in my email that I go to the county jail and I do ministry at the jail, and I'll occasionally get people who will say stuff like, "Hey, listen, I don't believe that Jonah was swallowed by a whale or a big fish. I mean, no one can do that. That just doesn't happen." And I usually respond with, "You know what? You're in luck today because you can still love Jesus and not, for the next 3 days only, you can love Jesus, get in, and you don't have to believe in the story of Jonah. Just kind of kid around with him a little bit." So I suppose in one sense, I don't really have a big dog in that race. It's because as long as that's what you want to do is love Jesus. But I think a lot of times people are not. That's not their concern. Their concern is to try to cause problems or at least try to make a name for themselves in some respects. So I lean towards a little. I lean towards a little more literal understanding of those events. I mean, that's just the way I am. I'm not necessarily committed to that. And in the end of the day, it's just about following Jesus. That's what it is for me, just following Jesus. And anybody who does that is a brother of mine. They don't have to agree on those things, in my opinion. So that may sound like a real weak answer to you. I don't know, but That's just my answer.
No, that's great. I, I mean, as you can tell, I love meeting new people and getting
Yeah,
all these different perspectives.
yeah.
It's all benefit for me. Yeah,
And for the community who's watching your videos is the benefit for. So yeah,
yeah,
I really enjoyed watching the interviews. It's just great takeaways on those things. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time and the effort into doing those. It's been really neat.
yeah. Thank you, Dane. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much I I'm not into like hiking and mountains. I wish I was. I probably should get into that stuff. But one of your passions, I'm guessing you've been into that for a long time.
Yeah, a little bit. If I can get the camera here, there's my hammock hanging above my office. It's above my desk right there. Up there is my backpacks. There's one, there's two backpacks, three backpacks, four backpacks.
Wow.
Gotta think for backpack. Yeah, I've been backpacking now for I don't know, 20 some years, longer than that, I suppose. It's been a long time.
Wow.
But yeah, I don't get out as much as I'd like to, Dale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would you would really get on with my sister-in-law. So my wife's sister, she'll often take her dog. She lives in Portland, in Oregon, um, and just go for days up in the mountains. She knows how to survive up
Absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
I should get into this stuff. And there's all these YouTubers and other vloggers who sort of live in these little huts covered in snow. And
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't have the time for something like that. I'm nor the desire, I suppose, to be out. I mean, I think the longest hike I've ever done was 10 days. It was a lot of fun, a lot of fun out there. But I like
yeah,
getting out for a couple of days here and there. I'm going to go out, I think, in 2 weeks down to the state of West Virginia. There's a group of us going down. We're going to do 3 days, 2 nights, and a hike there. And then I've got one coming up a couple of weeks after that. I'm planning on doing I'm going to do a real big push. I got a 70-mile hike that I'm planning. I'm going to try to get it done in 3 days and 2 nights, just sort of a marathon hike, just see if I can get it to do it. So,
wow. So
yeah.
have you ever been abroad to the UK or anywhere else?
I visited Germany. Yeah, one time. Well, my wife and I we went to Kenya, Africa. So we landed in England, I think, on that trip. We went there for on a mission trip quite a few years ago, and then a couple of years ago, my daughter was teaching in Germany, and so I went out to visit her and spent some time out in Germany. So
Wow,
that's it. Yeah.
wow. As you would love all the mountain ranges here in
Uh,
Wales, especially in the north. There'd be plenty of hikings,
uh,
hikes you could go up
uh,
there.
oh, I'm sure it'd be great.
Uh, yeah, we're coming to the States in August, funny enough.
Okay.
Land in San Francisco, see Naomi's
Yeah.
dad in Washington State, and then see her auntie back down in the LA area. So it's going to be quite a big trip.
Yeah, yeah, that's on the West Coast. I'm clear across on the
Yeah.
East Coast from there, but yeah, yeah, that'll be a fun trip. Absolutely. California's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. I've been there 6 or 7 times now, I think.
Oh wow.
Hope to see more of the States one day. I mean, from what I've seen from movies, I would love to go to sort of Colorado area,
Yeah,
Boulder, Denver, is it?
yeah, yeah, but yeah, I did some backpacking in Colorado and it was fantastic. Yeah, it really was. Yeah, for the Rocky Mountain National Park. So yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, those are mountains. Those are real. I don't know what Wales has, but those are 14,000 foot peaks in there. So they're really, really big. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been told Chicago has a good sort of music scene that might be nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good for you.
I'll get there one day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I
wow.
am gonna have to probably jump back to work. I got some things I got to finish up here, Dale. I don't mean to rush. I just still have to get some things done yet for the
That's
day.
okay,
But
Dane.
yeah, well, I appreciate you taking the time just to hear me out and just throwing some things at you. And if you do want to like talk again or do something else, let me know. We can arrange another one. It's totally up to you. Don't feel obligated. Just want to throw some things out to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll take all of this on board, especially that John 5. But no, thank you, Dane. It's been great to meet you in person. Thank you for letting me
Yeah.
use your videos in the film.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 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 Well, keep up the good work.
Will do. You too. Thank you.
All right. All right. See you now, Dale. Bye bye.
God bless. Bye.